Good evening and welcome to tonight's program. My wife said you may want to marry me. My name is Sally Kaplan. I'm the director of What Matters, Caring Conversations about End of Life. We are the proud co-sponsor of this evening's program, along with the Marlene Meyerson JCC Manhattan, and are delighted to be part of the amazing Reimagine Worldwide Virtual Festival. As everyone is getting settled, I want to say just a few words about our organization, What Matters. We are an advanced care planning initiative of the Jewish community of New York. Through our cadre of trained and certified facilitators spread over 18 sites, What Matters aims to educate our community about advanced care planning. We also encourage individuals to consider their life goals, their values and preferences as related to their healthcare choices. And we support individuals in selecting a healthcare agent, completing an advance directive, and communicating their wishes to the important people in their lives. Our ultimate mission is to ensure that everyone should live with the comfort of knowing their healthcare wishes are known, respected, and honored. While advanced care planning has always been important, now more than ever in the time of COVID-19, it is essential that we each designate a healthcare agent who understands what matters most to us and could speak on our behalf should we ever be in a medical situation where we are unable to speak for ourselves. What Matters will be sending a follow-up email to everyone registered for this program tonight, and we will be telling you about upcoming virtual advanced care planning sessions that you may wish to participate in or maybe just to observe. And if you're interested in learning more about What Matters, accessing our materials, or perhaps even starting an advanced care planning initiative in your own community, please visit our website for more information, www.whatmattersny.org. And that website will be in the chat for you. And now I'd like to introduce Megan Whitman, Director of the Lambert Center for Arts and Ideas at the Marlene Meyerson JCC Manhattan. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. As Sally said, my name is Megan Whitman, and I'm the director of the Lambert Center for Arts and Ideas at the Marlene Meyerson JCC Manhattan. Tonight, we are honored to welcome you to a Conversations event sponsored by our friends at What Matters and presented in partnership with Reimagine End of Life, a nonprofit organization committing to transforming our relationships to illness, caregiving, dying, grieving, and living fully. Running through July 9th, Reimagine is hosting a virtual festival featuring hundreds of free events designed to help people cope with the many challenges of this pandemic, while shining a light on issues of equity, particularly who does and who does not get to live and die well. To learn more about Reimagine, please visit their website, which we will place in the chat for easy access. Tonight, the JCC is honored to have Jason Rosenthal join our virtual stage to discuss his memoir, My Wife Said You May Want to Marry Me. Jason's the #1 New York Times bestselling author of Dear Boy, co-written with his daughter, Paris. He is the board chair of the Amy Krouse Rosenthal Foundation, which supports both childhood literacy and research in early detection of ovarian cancer. A lawyer, a public speaker, and a devoted father of 3, he is passionate about helping others find ways to fill their blank spaces as he continues to fill his own. Jason resides in Chicago, and I am beyond lucky to have Jason as my brother-in-law. Jason will be in conversation tonight with the incredible Jeannie Blaustein, who has spent her professional career supporting people in the work of having difficult conversations about love, loss, and conflict. She is a licensed clinical psychologist, pastoral counselor, and the founding board chair of Reimagine End of Life. Jeannie serves on the steering committee of What Matters here at the JCC, and she is an adjunct faculty member at Pace University, most recently teaching the psychology of death and dying. She has worked as a chaplaincy intern at Mount Sinai Hospital and has completed trainings to become an end-of-life doula. She's a proud JCC member, and we do love our members. She's a mother of 2 adult daughters and lives in New York City with her husband and their 2 dogs. Your questions tonight are really important to us, so we invite you to submit them at any point during tonight's event using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And audience questions will be answered towards the end of the program. And lastly, before I turn the screen over to Jeannie and Jason, I'm going to read an intention that Reimagine created as an offering for each of us as we enter into these conversations of love, loss, and life. There is no life without death, no love without loss. They are in constant complementary motion. But never before in our lives has the world stood so still. In the face of distance, illness, and isolation, we are here, together, reimagining a changed world, kinder, slower, more just. We are reimagining the giving and receiving of love, the cycles of loss and new beginnings, and what it means to be fully alive. We are here. Please welcome Jason and Jeannie.
Megan, thank you so much. And hello to everybody who's joined us, and welcome, Jason. I'm so honored to be here talking with you tonight about your new memoir, My Wife Said You May Want to Marry Me.
Thank you so much.
And the experiences that inspired you to write this beautiful book.
Oh, thank you so much
So
for having
glad you're
me.
here. Yeah, so glad. So as we're getting started, I want to just acknowledge that some of this material can be hard to talk about. And so I guess I want to thank you in advance for your courage and your desire to share your story of love and loss with us. And also what it means to keep on living after a profound loss. So this is a thank you in advance. And I know that we will have much to thank you for toward the end.
Well, I knew there was a great connection when I saw your tagline was so very much aligned with, what I've chosen to write about in my book, almost to the letter. Life, love,
almost
and
to the
loss.
letter. Exactly. So we are of like minds, very much. And we're going to talk about the remarkable column that your wife Amy wrote. You May Want to Marry My Husband, which was published in the New York Times Modern Love section just before, about 10 days before she died in 2017. So we're going to talk about that. But actually, before we get to that, I wanted to back up a little bit and help folks on the call get to know you, get to know Amy a little bit and the life that you created together, because it seems it's actually out of that life that column was born. So I wondered if we could start backwards a little bit, if that's okay.
For sure, absolutely.
And if you could give us a little sense, maybe describe a little bit about the life that you and Amy created together.
Sure. We connected when we were in our young 20s, which was a surprise to me. We went on a blind date. A guy who we call Uncle John, who was my father-in-law Paul's best childhood friend, contacted me. He knew me because he had dated my mother in the 70s between her two marriages. And so he knew us, Amy and I, both as kids. And he said, "You've got to call this woman. She's moving back from San Francisco from an advertising job to Chicago, and you've got to call her." Well, I was studying for the bar exam, and I was a little busy, but I did. I took the leap. And, from that moment on, my life changed. Amy famously says that after that first meal that she knew she wanted to marry me. Well, I wasn't so sure yet. I just didn't have the plan of getting married at such a young age, but it took me about a year. And we started a wonderful life together. We raised our family here in Chicago. Living with Amy and raising children with Amy was really a joy. We had 3 kids about 2 years apart, and so there was a lot of chaos for sure. But there was a lot of beauty and fun and creativity and whimsy that Amy just had naturally, that she brought to our relationship and to our family life together.
Sounds fun and beautiful. And I think in your book you said at times you felt like you were living under an Amy star, that there was almost a kind of magic that kind of enveloped the life that you guys had been building together. And then your youngest child, your daughter Paris, was about to go off to school. You guys were about to begin your empty nest chapter when tragedy struck your family in September of 2015. So if you would, Jason, tell us what happened and how it was that you and Amy received this terrible news.
Yeah. As you said, it was, some couples sort of dread that emptiness that might happen after their last child goes off to college or wherever into the workforce. And we were so much looking forward to it. We talked about it a lot. We had plans together. And Amy was out of town on a business trip. She frequently took short business trips. And she called me and said, I'm having some discomfort in my stomach. And this is from a woman who barely ever, over 26 years of marriage, complained about anything physical. And so I thought it was something related to her stomach. And she had called her family doctor, who said, I think your husband should pick you up at the airport and go straight to the hospital. And indeed, that's what we did. And I'm not sure who was more surprised at the news. The young doctor, who couldn't have been a couple years out of medical school, had to come out and tell us that there was a scan that showed an irregularity and that we needed to get it looked at. And so that was the devastating news. And we shortly followed up with an oncologist, and it turned out to be late stage ovarian cancer.
So I want to ask you how you moved from, a charmed, beautiful life to that moment. What did you say to each other as the impossible seemed to be crashing in on you?
It's sort of in stages, but at first, the reality is that we were, of course, devastated, shocked, all of those feelings. But we sort of quickly shifted into the mode of really just trying to take care of what was present and what was in front of us. And that was to see if, we could be of those small statistics that might have this become a chronic disease and not a fatal disease. And, so we were hyper-focused. We reached out to our vast community to find good medical care. We made a bunch of lists, which were one of Amy's famous things that she did. And we got to work, really. We got to work. And of course, throughout that early phase, there were so many emotions floating around, including, the devastation of having to let our children know what was going on.
Yeah. How old were your kids at the time?
Well, our youngest was just going to college, so 18, 19, and the boys were older, 2 years apart, so 21-ish and 23-ish.
In the book, you write about the moment of having to pick up the phone and call your kids, and you also talk about how there were moments when you kind of found yourself, I don't know what the right word is, but kind of railing, like, how dare this happen, right? Like, this is not going to happen to Amy. And, I think that raises such a profound spiritual question for all of us when bad things happen. And we have so many different ways of dealing with it. Some people get really busy, some people get numb, we freeze up in different ways. And, one of the things I'm hearing is that for you moved into action, right? Of sort of, what can we do to be one of those rare and blessed statistics that survive this? What else was the wrestling like? How did that play out for you?
Well, how it played out for me, it's interesting you talk about spirituality, because, I'm Jewish, and I feel Jewish, and I have been raised, I went to a Jewish day school and things like that. But, this certainly does call into question all of those big existential questions, about a woman who, like you alluded to, just lived her life in such an incredibly beautiful way. Not only taking care of her body and herself, but being so kind and giving to other people. And you start to question everything. How could this possibly happen? Of course. With time, though, you realize that is not an option. You don't get to pick and choose who gets ill and who doesn't. But I think a more finite answer to your question is that there were some incredibly, incredibly dark moments as we began to move forward, where the devastating emotions take over. And we can talk about that as much as you'd like, but really, I had a job, and my job was really to be hyper-focused on Amy's healthcare and getting her well.
I know that for many people, that job is so meaningful, right? It takes over everything, and I'm wondering kind of what happened to the rest of your life as this job filled your screen, so to speak.
What happened to the rest of my life is that everything around me, other than my family and my children, became irrelevant. To be honest with you, you know, I'm a practicing lawyer, and I have an office downtown, and had been sort of struggling throughout my adult life as to whether that really provided me the meaning that I was looking for in my professional life. And so I sort of quickly put aside everything other than addressing the immediate needs, which was to be there for Amy, to love her and to take care of her, and to be there as a strong and steady force for my children as well.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's a lot to carry. It's a lot. You know, I was struck by a letter that you wrote to Amy about halfway through her illness, where you reflect on, you know, the things you said to each other when you got married 26 years before or so, and you know that you had committed to be with each other in sickness and in health, as many of us do in these ceremonies. But you said you were thinking more about knee surgeries and the flu. And, you know, I guess it makes me want to ask you, is there anything that you wish you'd known then at the time that you got married that would have, I don't know, nobody can be prepared, but that would have somehow grounded you or prepared you or anchored you for what was to come?
No, I don't think so. You know, we I got a flavor of living with a writer when on our honeymoon we wrote out a list that we called Amy and Jason Rosenthal's marriage goals and ideas. And I talk a little bit about this in the book, and I include it because as I was preparing and researching my own life in the process of writing this book, I found that document buried somewhere in our crawl space. And without really being conscious of it, we really did follow those guidelines quite a bit throughout the course of our marriage. And I know that it's unique and rare, but we really had such a solid foundation in our union that we didn't have a lot of things left unsaid
Mm-hmm.
by the time Amy died. And you know, perhaps we'll touch on this a little bit more too, but we did have time to really get into some very intense and profound conversations that not a lot of people have. So, you know, part of what I guess I would say in answer to your question is we need to do what you're doing in your professional life. We need to do what your organization is doing. We need to do a little bit more about what I found myself being a messenger for, and that's to talk about death because it's an uncomfortable subject.
Yeah, it is. And we will talk in some more depth about the conversations you and Amy had. I wonder, just to give folks a little bit of a flavor, what were some of the things on your marriage goals list?
I could read a few.
Okay, awesome.
Well, for example, dinner time. Time to be together. Music in the background is fine, but TV is not. Never stop learning. Take classes, read, cook, and travel. Get dressed up and go on dates. And so those are a few of the things that were on that list, and they became really important. You know, the last one in particular is really important and was important for us, even when the kids were really small, to remember, you know, that we came first and that our relationship was important amongst the chaos of having 3 young children.
So you were really a union, the two of you. Even with everything else going on, you were kind of at the center of your relationship. It sounds very powerful, a very, very powerful bond. And, you know, you mentioned your Jewish background. And in fact, in the book, you write about very warm and cozy Shabbat dinners over the years, and about how important gratitude was in your lives. I think for each other and also for all of the blessings in your lives. And you also mentioned rituals, not necessarily religious rituals, but traditions and all kinds of loving gestures that you had between you. And it seems like holidays were a big deal, and the Oscars and Valentine's Day. And when Amy got sick, how did you deal with the rituals that had been a part of your life? Did that continue through her illness?
It continued, and it wasn't really reciprocal at that point because Amy was pretty sick. But on Valentine's Day, for example, I just did what I usually do, and on that last Valentine's Day, I recall buying some blank sheet music and tacking up love song lyrics all throughout the house. And you mentioned the Oscars, which is it's a fun story in the book, but I guess I can talk a little bit about it. It was sort of a inverse gift of the Magi story, in the sense that Amy was getting treatment in Florida where her parents lived, and I was traveling back and forth very often, every week, sometimes for a full week. And I was going to Florida at the time of the Oscars, and so I put on a tuxedo. I got on my Southwest Airlines flight in a tuxedo, and wouldn't you know it, by the time I rolled up to the house in my Uber, there was a red carpet rolled out from the point of the driveway all the way to the front door. So even then, we were sort of in sync without even talking about it.
Beautiful.
It was a lovely moment, really was.
That's a beautiful moment. I'm struck in your book, and I think you say this and many others have noted about your book, that it's really a love story in many ways. And as you know from what Sally said at the top of the program tonight, and what Megan shared about Reimagine, both of these organizations are dedicated to helping people have different end of care and other decisions related to dying that we don't really want to have, but in fact, which are so valuable when we can have those conversations. And you said earlier that you and Amy had time. And so it makes me think, and I want to ask you about this, that having these conversations and even completing an advance directive is really an act of love. It's a way of saying in concrete terms, I'm with you till the very end, and I will honor your wishes until the end. So I wonder if you could tell us how these conversations were a part of your love story.
Yeah, first of all, we could start with the column that Amy wrote, or we could maybe end there, because that was really a document for sure, and really some very, very express and clear language directed at me. But throughout the course of Amy's illness, when she was healthy enough to speak and to really engage with me, we talked about a lot of things. We talked about issues and concerns that I had, knowing that I would become a single parent. I had a lot of fear about that, and I really can't express enough how those conversations helped me to start to become that single parent to these adult children. For example, how could I do it alone without you? And simply by saying to me, you know what, your relationship with each one of these kids is so good, and they love you in such a unique way, you're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. Mm-hmm. And just that, in and of itself, having time to talk about that, for me and for our unique circumstance, was very powerful. And then we started to talk about practical considerations, some financial issues, gifts and things like that. And then we talked about other practical things relating to, the final phase of dying. And that is, what kind of service do you want? Do you want it to be secular, or do you want it to have some religious component? Do you want music, for example? Who would you like to speak? And so we had time to talk about those really important issues that people don't often think about or talk about. Mm-hmm. And for many, I've learned since then, people really want to tie up loose ends, with family members, loved ones they've been estranged from, maybe good friends that they haven't talked to in many years. And so those are other conversations that I would encourage people to think about and talk about.
Why do you think we don't? I think you're right that we want to tie up loose ends, but we often avoid these conversations. Why do you think that is?
Well, two things. Like I said, I think we in this culture don't talk about death, period. So we don't
Hmm.
walk through life much the way I feel like I am now, conscious of the end. We think like there's going to be tomorrow, there's going to be more time, more time, more time. And, that just is not true. We know that. I know that now, of course, from my own
Hmm.
personal experience. We know that in this environment of this terrible pandemic that we're living through. So we just don't know when that end is going to happen. And for some of us, it happens way too soon.
Yeah. So I want to ask you whether you ever had these conversations before Amy was diagnosed. Had you had advanced care conversations, or had you talked about what kind of care you might each want if you were unable to speak for yourselves, or funeral, any of that stuff?
Well, we did some estate planning, and
Hmm.
so included in that are some form documents, I would say,
Hmm.
powers of attorney for healthcare and things like that. But the answer is really no. We really
Hmm.
didn't, and that's why I'm trying to make my voice heard and encourage people to do it younger when you're healthy and when you have the opportunity to make those decisions.
Hmm. Now, we also know, and I'm sure you know, having been through this experience, that those conversations are not a one-time conversation. So I'm actually curious if you are able to describe how the conversations changed for you and for Amy as her illness progressed, as it became clear that in fact it was going to be a terminal illness. What shifted in the conversation?
Well, um, I guess weaving in and out of super intense emotions. That's
Hmm.
that's the biggest thing that happened. Is there was a lot of just incredible sadness and wanting everything to be okay, and so
Hmm.
shifting from that to um, realizing that this was terminal and that the end was going to happen, whether it was going to be in a month or in 2 months or whenever that was going to be. Um, I think that's the biggest way, is really talking
Hmm.
about how we felt versus getting into some really specific details.
Hmm. So actually along those lines, I think you said in the book that the conversations actually brought you closer together. Can you talk about that?
Well, I mean, people in relationships talk about intimacy, and that takes a lot of different forms. But boy, oh boy, when you're looking in the eyes of someone who you love so much and who you know is going to die, those conversations are so deep uh, and so meaningful that I can't think of a more intimate experience. And as much as we loved each
Mhm.
other and were comfortable and didn't really have those relationship issues, this brought us like closer in a spiritual way, not a religious way, but in a spiritual way that's almost impossible to describe.
Mhm. I hope people are really taking that in, because I think so often, when we are facing a terrible loss, it is only the loss and only the darkness. But I think you are reminding us that there is also real beauty and real intimacy if you're able to let yourself go there. Um, am I hearing you?
Absolutely. And, one thing you learn about being with someone in hospice at the end of life is that there is so much beauty. And, within a couple of years of losing Amy, I lost my father-in-law. And so I was prepared a little bit more for home hospice at that moment. And, he was surrounded, the patriarch of the family, surrounded by all of his adult children and in-laws and most of his grandchildren. And I can't think of a more beautiful way to leave this earth than to be surrounded with love like
Mm. It's really, really very, very powerful message, I think, that you're holding and offering us. I want to talk a little bit about Amy's creativity and the decision that she made to write this column for the Times. It was a very out of the box move. I'm guessing that's part of why it went, went far and wide. People were so drawn to this, really the courage that it took to break that taboo, to talk about what life would be like without her here, and to offer you this intentional empty space to begin to fill and to rebuild your life. So I want to just get a sense from you of what that was like for you when this came out. I know you read it first before it was published. Tell us a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, I was, posted up right here at my dining room table, which is, again, my makeshift office during this quarantine. And Amy was across the room writing, but struggling physically to get through this one final piece that I knew she wanted to write. Struggling, I'm saying, because she was heavily medicated and, terminally ill. And so in between micro naps and all of that, this is the woman she was, that she was able to write such a beautiful, powerful, funny piece. And while I did not know what it was as she was writing it, when she was done, she asked me to look at it. And I mean, I was blown away, of course, that she wanted to do this for me, and of course, at the writing style and the prose. But living with a writer for 25, 26 years, you never know what's going to happen. But she knew. She knew she wanted it to appear in the Modern Love column of the New York Times. That was not something that was necessarily on my radar in the Sunday paper. And so when it came out, as you mentioned earlier, it was 10 days before she died. And so she herself was really unable to embrace the incredible response that this article received. She was there and kind of understood it, but she wasn't fully capable of doing that. And for me, I certainly realized what was happening slowly with the popularity of this piece, but I was so devastated with grief and dealing with the end of Amy's life that it really didn't hit me until much later.
Yeah. I mean, that makes so much sense. And I guess I'm curious, I'm sure many of us are curious, what the impact of this was on your life as it's unfolded over the last 3 years. I know you received lots of letters in the beginning, and you've shared that, lots of women who thought, all right, I guess maybe I'm that one. But more broadly than that, what was the impact of Amy's letter?
Yeah, it was so powerful, really, as I began to sort of emerge from the depths of grief. The sort of loosening is a term I've heard recently, loosening of the grips that grief has on you, which is when I began to appreciate Amy's piece and the message it was for me, the gift it was for me, not just to find love again, because that was expressly stated, but I embraced that empty space and used it as a metaphor as I continued to move forward in my life. And as I began to speak publicly about these issues, which was my choice, I decided to give a TED Talk, which really exposed me to a whole nother path in my life, which was to begin speaking publicly about these issues. And so the combination of being this messenger, but also embracing that blank page has really completely changed my life. Total 180,
Wow.
made me appreciate those small moments in life that Amy appreciated naturally. That's what she did, it caused me to refocus my professional life. It caused me to start this foundation and to write and to think in a different way and to meditate. And so, unfortunately, it took losing Amy for me to really change my focus in a way that I think some of us struggle with throughout the course of our professional life and might want to think about earlier, when it really feels important.
It's interesting you say that. At Reimagine, we often pose the question, why wait? Why do we wait? And I think you're really asking that same question. Why do we wait? Why does it have to take, this kind of, the magnitude of this kind of loss to kind of wake us up in a way? I'm curious, what's been the most, I don't know the most, but what's been a surprising consequence of this invitation that she gave you for your own fresh start? What could you never have imagined? I mean, I guess probably couldn't have imagined any of it, but what's been surprising for you?
I mean, I think the most surprising, so it's the way to put it, is that I have found my own voice. It wasn't like I was this timid, shy guy, but I consider myself to be pretty much an introvert, especially when you live with an extrovert who's really comfortable being in public and is a public figure. Before this all happened, if you Googled Jason B. Rosenthal, you'd literally come up with nothing. And that's definitely changed at this moment. But I have found my voice, not just in my speaking and in my writing, but I think in my life in general and in my relationships.
Mm-hmm. So I hate that silver lining expression, but I want to just acknowledge this is sort of an and, right? There is deep grief, and there is also something that is emerging for you in this time. And I guess there's a very powerful moment in your book where you describe your experience at Burning Man, which, for those who don't know, is a late summer festival that happens in the Nevada desert for folks interested in different kinds of transformational experiences and connection and all kinds. And about a year and a half after Amy died, some friends invited you, Jason. And I'm wondering if you would read a short passage, because it feels like such a sort of a nodal point where something began to shift for you. Would you read that for us?
I'd be happy to. Sure.
Great.
Sure. Because my entire being was so open to any experience at Burning Man, my heart was open as well. As I sat in the grieving temple, I could close my eyes and weep deeply. And I could sit with those feelings for as long as I needed to. My tears flowed for Amy and for what we had together and for what we were missing out on. Soon, when I was ready to, I left the others grieving and biked back to my RV. Within hours, I was dancing to the oonts oonts of the DJ music emanating from multiple locations. This process made it clearer to me that my life just might be this way, and that it was okay. One moment I might be really deep in my grief, and the next I might find myself discovering joy in my new life. Burning Man isn't necessarily for everyone, but I think it forced me to confront things that were still lingering beneath the surface, things that I had to purge, and I needed the space and the lack of judgment to do it.
Wow, thank you for reading that. What do you
Yeah.
think it was that helped you begin to purge whatever was left and to go into that place of openness and deep grief?
Well, if you're focusing right now on Burning Man, the surprise to me in going to Burning Man, which most people consider a hedonistic party in the middle of the desert, and it may be that way for some people that are half my age, but the surprise to me was this grieving temple. I'd heard about it, but I could not imagine how amazing and powerful and beautiful that experience was. It changes every year. It's a beautiful architectural structure. But when you step inside, there's all types of people, and there's all types of offerings that people bring for their loved ones. And as I indicated in that passage, you just sit and you just access these feelings. And so I think the answer is, the purge for me was really feeling no judgment, a safe space to just sit there and weep and weep. And I did not mind accessing those emotions. Those are important emotions to have, to feel. And, you know, in the course of your everyday life, as you move forward from the deep throes of grief, you, you those moments come less frequently. And so I really embraced that moment in time.
Mhm. It made me wonder also whether there was anything about the Modern Love column that kind of thrust you so immediately into a public space, that there was something very, very precious about just kind of being alone with others in that grieving temple, and not having to, you know, kind of hold it together for your kids or anybody else. I'm curious about that.
Oh, it's a great question. And I think your observation is very accurate. Consciously or subconsciously, that really is what happened. You know, I did have a lot of strength for others. And even after Amy died, I didn't realize in my own self that I wasn't really taking care of myself too. You know, like physically, I didn't even realize that I'd lost a bunch of weight, and I wasn't, you know, taking care of myself. I really do enjoy exercise and things like that. So yeah, I think that that is really, really true. I was thrust into a lot of public situations. I had to make some very, you know, important decisions. And so being free in that environment was powerful.
I think that's an important message for folks, right? Even if we don't all find ourselves at Burning Man, just remembering that that we have our own selves, our own care, our own needs, even as we're supporting those around us, particularly our kids or other people who might be leaning on us in different ways. So I know we're going to get to the Q&A in just a minute. So I want to just ask a couple. You know, I recently heard David Kessler, who was the writer who worked with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and he was talking about meaning. And he said that meaning doesn't take away the pain, but it can be kind of a cushion that helps us a little bit with our pain. And I guess, you know, you've pointed to this already, Jason, but I guess I'm wondering where, as you sit here today, where is your cushion of meaning? What has given dimension and solace to your experience of pain and loss?
For me, the meaning that I've been able to access and incorporate into my everyday life includes slowing down a little bit. The practice of meditation has helped me a lot as I journey through each day. Doing important work and meaningful work, both by starting the foundation that I started in Amy's honor, and speaking publicly about issues that I know I've learned really, really connect with people. And we've talked a lot about death, but I also have connected with so many people on the general topic of loss. It was very much a surprise to me how important speaking about end of life issues brought forth other categories of loss in people. And I've made deep connections, and that's been so rewarding.
Well, that's true. That's beautiful, and it's true, right? That loss comes in many forms, and it's not always about death, but the experience of grief is a powerful one that so many people can find support from each other. So it's wonderful that you have found that cushion of meaning. And I think the audience will revolt if I don't ask you. You know, you've shared so much with us about your own resilience through this. So I guess I have to ask the question if you've begun to test the dating waters at all.
Yeah, and I am really very fortunate to be in a meaningful relationship with a wonderful woman, and I do talk a little bit about that subject at the end of the book. Not just because Amy gave me the gift and I want to pay that forward to people, but because over the years I've talked to a lot of people And the struggle that those who are left behind go through, the guilt and all the other feelings, is really, really profound. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about what that early dating was like, and give people permission.
Yeah, such an important part of life, and that it raises so many questions for people as they move back into that part of themselves, really, and their lives. So I think it's wonderful that you're including that as part of what you're sharing. So I want to just move to some questions. We have some great questions from folks. So this is from Nancy, and Nancy's asked us, when you and Amy created a plan to treat the cancer, how were your children involved, or did you include them in your plan for Amy to get well?
It's a great question. You know, I touched upon this earlier when we told them, I mean, it was just so difficult to make that call. But immediately, you know, these three incredible human beings shifted that for us and made it really clear that they were there for their mom and would do anything in their power to help her through this. And so, yes, we were as clear as we could be every step of the way about the diagnosis and what that meant. As a matter of fact, this is an incredible testament to our healthcare team. At one point, the kids on their own contacted one of the oncologists and asked him if they could go in and talk to him. And it was incredible and so generous of him, especially in this day and age of healthcare, that he gave them some moments, some precious moments of his time, and answered all the questions that they had.
Wow.
But, you know, the kids were incredible. And Paris was with me every moment of hospice, and the boys traveled back and forth and were just champs. You know, my middle son finished college throughout this whole thing somehow and possibly. Yeah.
Somebody's asking, Abigail is asking, saying, you haven't spoken about anger. Did anger show up in this experience for you? And if so, how?
Yes, anger for sure did. It for sure did. I remember thinking, though, that I had not really like screamed or yelled, or, you know, and so I sort of tried to do that when I was at Burning Man a few times. But yes, it was definitely a lot of anger directed at whoever, the universe, for causing this to come into our lives.
What helped you with that?
Well, what helped me is love from my community and from my family. You know, I'm admit that I'm so lucky. You know, I have an incredible community of friends, old close friends, and a remarkable family.
Somebody has asked if you'd be kind enough to tell us something about the painting that's behind you, and is it for sale?
Well, I talk a little bit about, and I have told you a little bit about our mission. Part of one of our marriage goals was to continue to learn and explore. And so one of the things that I did early on was to learn how to paint. You know, I was always interested in it. And I took a wonderful series of classes from a professional painter at his studio, mostly with older women who were retired, you know, and me, this young guy. But anyway, it's become something that I, before writing a lot, found as a way to access my creativity. And so I painted that. Not for sale, though, really. Maybe you could commission me for something else, but I haven't thought about that in my life yet.
Thank you for letting her know it's not available, but it is beautiful. Somebody asked if you had help caring for Amy, and you've referenced that she was at home with hospice, and you write about this in the book. Can you talk a little bit about that decision to have home hospice and what worked and what was hard about it for you?
Oh, I don't think we have enough time for that. No.
Okay.
I'm kidding. You know, no, the reality is that, you know, when you're faced with this decision, do you want to do hospice at home or in the hospital? And for us, it was really not a decision. We knew we wanted to come home and make Amy as comfortable as she could be in her space and in our home, in our dream home. And I really did have two partners, primary partners. One was my mother-in-law, who was at almost every medical appointment, taking copious notes and being that rational person. And then my daughter, but you know, all of my kids really. My daughter was there every moment, and we decided there is no real guidebook, which is why I did want to spend some time talking about this in the book and giving some of the things that I just naturally decided to do. And it comes down to really making that time as loving and as comfortable and as peaceful for the person who's ill. And in our case, we brought in lots of music. We provided beauty in the form of candles, and family and friends came by. And yeah, I would just refer you to the book for some more of those really powerful moments.
So this is one of the beauties of home hospice, right? Is that you can create that kind of atmosphere. And someone has actually just written in a question, which I think is really important, especially, and you referenced this earlier, Jason, especially in this time of COVID. And also, you know, we know that death doesn't always come this way, right? It comes through accidents or sudden illness or race-based violence we're all experiencing and witnessing and thinking about very much. So what do you say to folks who don't have the chance to kind of create the atmosphere and who even don't have a chance to say goodbye? Do you have thoughts about that?
Well, specifically about, you know, the current situation with the pandemic and not being able to be with loved ones, it's really devastating. And as I read more about it, I you know, reflecting on my own experience, really have such empathy for those people. But I would say, yes, that, you know, channel a little bit of Amy, and that is to get creative with your expression of your own grief. Post something online, write a letter, do something, share it with your community, because this will end at some point. We will get back to being together again, and you'll have the time or moment to really focus on each other and to embrace, and to hug and to cry together, which I know is so important and was so important for me, and which many people are missing out on right
Yeah, yeah. Well, related to that, Jim has asked, I think, a really important question, which we were touching on earlier, and maybe this will be our last one, or maybe next to last one. How can we approach the level of intimacy in conversation with our loved ones that Amy's terminal illness brought to you? Is it even possible without death being so imminent? And I think this is such a great question, because when we think about living fully, this is what you're talking about. How do we live fully without the kind of loss and threat of loss that you've experienced?
Well, in my experience, you know, after Amy died, I've learned that talking about difficult issues, even with strangers in the same room, opens us up in ways that are intimate, that are meaningful. You know, it's very difficult to share a story of loss, but once you do, you would be really surprised to learn that most of the people you're sitting around with have a shared story of loss in some way. You know, whether that's losing a family pet or going through a divorce or hitting rock bottom, all of these different things I've learned about that people really want to speak about. And the other thing is, you know, we are encouraging you and I are encouraging people to talk about these subjects earlier in their lives. And just by raising these topics, I think it will bring you closer and, you know, forge a sense of intimacy that you may not have had before.
So somebody's asked about the name of the foundation that you started in Amy's name. Would you share that again and tell us again what it's about?
Yes, thank you for asking that question. It's the Amy Krouse Rosenthal Foundation, Amy Krouse Rosenthal Foundation.org. And it's a twofold mission. On the one hand, we're specifically granting a researcher in the area of early detection of ovarian cancer, because statistics show that early detection results in a 90% 5-year survival rate, whereas late stage detection, which is much, much, much more common, unfortunately results in about a 20% 5-year survival rate. And on the other hand, the second part of our mission is child literacy. And so we've been really, really fortunate to have been in the position to donate tens of thousands of books to kids in need all over the country.
So I want to just point to the umbrella on the pillow next to you. Can you tell us about the yellow umbrella?
Yeah, the yellow umbrella has really become Amy's legacy symbol as part of the foundation trademark, if you will. It's based on a project that Amy did, which you can find on YouTube, called The Beckoning of Lovely, where she organized a community gathering, not knowing who was going to be there, how many people were going to be there, and she was going to be the one walking in with a yellow umbrella.
Beautiful. And now in Chicago, there is a statue, no?
There sure is. You know, that was one of the other things that I just knew I wanted to accomplish after Amy died, and that was to have a public piece of art commissioned in her honor. And so, along with a local artist, we got it done. You know, it took us 2 years to navigate the bureaucracies of the city of Chicago and the Park District. But if you come to Chicago and you go to Lincoln Park in a little area called Grandma's Garden, there's a beautiful yellow umbrella with a gorgeous glass top that has images of the local flowers that grow in that park.
So Jason, a number of people are writing in, and Sue is one of them. A giant heartfelt thank you for sharing yourself with us tonight. And I just want to add to that, I know many of us who have lost someone dear have struggled with a lot of the feelings that you've described, and also have had to put one foot in front of the other, as you have, to put ourselves back into life that is nevertheless forever changed. And I think your writing and your beautiful memoir and your willingness to talk about this really speaks to the fact that this is not easy, it's not linear, but there is meaning and there is beauty, and your powerful story really reminds us that we are never alone. So I want to thank you, as I know many in the audience have already texted in, thanking you for your candor and your honesty, and also your deep commitment to honoring what's true for you, right? This is your story as much as it is Amy's story. And you have moved through and with grief, as you say, and it's been really a joy to be with you. And I want to give you the last word, just to say I know that we all wish you well, but please, why don't you take us out?
Well, I just want to thank you in particular for moderating and for asking such wonderful questions, important questions. And for everyone who I can't see, who I know you're hopefully comfortable on your couch watching this virtually. My whole world has shifted into the virtual environment, as most of us have and gotten used to. So thank you all for being with me and for being with us. And of course, thank you to Megan for bringing us all together.
Great. Well, it's been a joy to be with you. Take care, Jason. Take care, everybody, and have a good evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you.